That's gotta be a lot of fun.
And that friend of mine.
Oh, neat. Oh, that sounds great. When are you gonna do that with it?
Yeah, are you away
Okay,
from
and the
home
beach is
every
down.
single night?
I feel like it's always down and everything.
This week's particularly. Well, my wife's away in New York tomorrow, so the only day I don't have a meeting at night, I'm home with 2 kids on, so.
Oh my God.
How come we have an empty seat for this?
I think that's the mic that does that.
Oh,
Yeah, that's the mic that doesn't work.
Oh, I'm the other mic that doesn't work anymore.
That is a clever, that was a clever one.
Sometimes I press it too hard and I put it too long. Does it? Yeah, like, that's the way it is. All
All right, it's 7
right.
o'clock.
That's not first.
First, I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Michelle, will you lead us in a moment of silence?
Sure. I'd like to just remember, I'd like to remember all of our military abroad and stateside. Thank you to all who have served.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll announce that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. Apologize for last meeting where we had a glitch on YouTube. Streaming stopped. And, Chairman's report just announced the board met in executive session on September 21st and tonight, the 28th, to discuss personnel matters related to budgets. We don't have any public hearing. We're not doing emergency services. This, as you know, is a workshop meeting for the budget.
Can you interrupt me for 1 second?
Do we also announce, since we met with our partners last night in executive session, we don't need to announce that one? I just was curious, that was on my mind, I know that we've done that, yes. All right, good, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. It's a good question. So this is a budget workshop, so I will invite everybody out in TV land and Christina here. Welcome you to our action-packed thrill ride of a budget meeting. We don't have any old business we're going to talk about, and so we've Eric, you want to talk about under new business? It's the scheduling of future budget meetings.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to conserve everybody's energy as much as possible, we met every Tuesday this month. If we continue on this current schedule of doing the budget workshop separately, it'll be about 9 weeks in a row we will have met. So I am proposing that budget workshop number 3 be held the same night as the regular scheduled board meeting on October 19th. So we can sort of piggyback off of that. And then we would have the final budget workshop number 4, which would be November 9th. And that is more, both of them are a little bit more of a discussion based, I would say, versus a workshop, because they're very specific subjects versus these 2 broad nights of having fun discussion. So that is my proposal, would be October 19th and November 9th. And again, they're simultaneous with the regular meeting. So unless there is any objection, I don't need a vote, but I would proceed with that and update the calendar accordingly online, things of that nature.
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
I'll note that we don't have a meeting on election day.
We do not, yes. Thank you.
All right, so basically we're right down to the purpose of this meeting. The first meeting was general funds. This meeting has to do with all other funds in the budget. And I am going to turn the meeting over to Dave and Derek.
All right, so the first fund that we're going to take a look at is what we call our liquid fuels fund. This one I put in a placeholder based on what we had in our budget. Typically we get that information right around this time, and I just got it yesterday.
Oh, good.
So it's not 497,000, it will be 504,000, so
Good.
a little bit extra.
Yeah, that's good.
This is a fund where it's basically for all highway type materials, paving, snow removal, plowing, tree removal, and it varies greatly year to year based on needs. So I used a 4-year average for the expense allocation for the 22 projection. And obviously the amount that goes in here would basically be saved from what we would spend out of the general fund for public works on these same types of issues.
I noticed that snow materials is up significantly even over prior years, and I noticed that DSAP's announced that their rate per ton is down this year. So is that number larger because someone read the Farmer's Almanac?
I did, Mark Miller did tell me that he thinks it's gonna be a bad one, but, you know, it really is all going to the same place, so I can move the numbers up and down in here to whichever makes more sense, absolutely.
Excuse me, Dave, just so you know, Chris is going to have to make 2 copies of the budget.
Note of that, David.
Let me try and get a clarification. The of course, liquid fuels fund, and if we look at snow materials, supplies, for 22, 63,400, and then snow equipment rental, 9,000. In the general fund budget, we have, under highway snow and ice removal, for 2022, we have 80,500 for materials and supplies, and et cetera, for repairs and rental. Are those intermingled, or they're 2 separate budgets, and those that, so in other words, like 63,400 and the 80,500, we're talking $140,000 that's available for materials, or is there some kind of intermingling there? I'm not quite sure. One pays the other back. I'm not sure.
So instead of basically doing the general budget first, really you have to do it all together, but this is my first time doing it, and I've realized that at this point, the intricacy going back and forth. So the general fund was budgeted as is, and then this technically could reduce a revised general fund budget.
Okay, so
It would be the total amount of both together.
yeah, I think that typically the liquid fuels is that supplemental fund that can, you know, help manage some of those other costs, the costs that oftentimes otherwise would find themselves in the general fund budget. So I didn't know whether, again, it was 140 or whether it was going to be one, but that, or that the liquid fuels fund was going to be paying back the general fund, because you know what I'm saying. I know it was 2 tranches of dollars, or one playing against the other.
Right, so typically, what Barb will do is watch the liquid fuels that would qualify from the general fund budget over the course of the year. And when we get to the end of the year in December, she tallies it all up, make sure that we're not short from October to December, and then we would pay it all back. We basically pay it all back from liquid fuels.
Okay, so you do a one-time end-of-year sweep of.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been the history. Yeah.
Correct.
So that essentially that fund wipes itself clean each year.
So the stormwater material supply, you know, salt was up, supply, that's down 88 grand, is that from year-end projections, is that a?
This is budget versus year-end projection. All the increase decreases are 22 budget.
Okay, so
21 projection.
So I'm looking at the 2022 budget at 10,200, where previous years it was at 45, it was at 98. It was a big decrease. I'm just trying to figure out why.
Just the 4-year average, but,
Okay.
and that's going back to 2017. 17, 18, 19, 20. For stormwater.
It's the stormwater,
Yeah, that's the one that jumps out the most,
materials and supplies.
Rip wrap, corrugated metal, things, piping, things of that nature.
Is there a reason why it's come down so far? What did we do last year or this year that we're not doing?
Yeah, I mean, if we had 45,000 for the actual in 20, and we're projecting 98 for 21, what's the rationale for dropping it down 90% to $10,200? I guess that's the question. And maybe Mark Miller has the handle on that as to why.
Yeah, we might get back and consult with Mark a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Again,
this,
you guys don't have as much backstory on this, Mark may, and there could be a reason, but that one's,
That's interesting.
yeah, I can sharpen the pencil on all of these various categories. The main thing I would just wanted to highlight is the total dollars would be going back to.
Yeah.
It would, in any of these, it's gonna go back to public works somewhere.
Same with equipment rentals, we budgeting up 100%, 4%.
Bottom line is liquid fuels is what it is, and if we spend more than what the liquid fuels budget is, it's gonna be paid for from other categories in the general fund.
I do actually have a little bit of an explanation on the equipment rental.
Oh, okay.
It might not be all of it, but some of the microchip issues that are going on. Mark and I actually talked today, there might be some more rentals going on next year if we can't get that straightened out. So that's a little bit of a preparation in that, just in case.
Yeah, he said 3 trucks were
It's 4.
4 trucks.
And we talked to the salespeople at Sayers, and they have 7,000 microchips on back order. All somewhere between Thailand and here, I guess.
That makes some
So
sense.
Well,
there's
the-
7,000 trucks out there that are in need of that.
Correct. Now, he did say that one of ours is on a high priority list, but it's just one, so.
Well, that's where one of the all-terrain vehicle that we just purchased, that's gonna come in hand because it can have a snowplow put on it.
Yeah.
And it can be put into action immediately, which is helpful. It certainly doesn't solve the problem, but
Okay.
Any other questions on liquid fuels? The next fund is Capital Reserve Fund. Capital Reserve Fund, we put aside money from the general fund every December. There's a transfer, and this is putting aside money for our capital replacement. All of our big projects are expenditures out of the Capital Reserve Fund. You can see a lot of the big office equipment, things for the township building. That would be anything like computers or big doors. I itemized over on the notes on the right, the placeholders, working with Mark Miller for 22 budget, the needs that he has.
Okay, so,
If we look under revenues then for the capital reserve fund, that you have listed down here, 919,000. From the general fund, we're gonna be contributing, a little over $400,000 of general fund cash to fuel this, 919,000, just call it 920,000. And then, other big portions are associated with the grants for the dams. So you have 380 and 250. What's that, 5, 630, something like that. So that those two grants alone, adding into this $920,000 total revenue for the capital, more than offsets the contribution that we're making at $404,000. Am I misreading that somehow? In other words, those two grants are, again, 500, 600, and 630. So that leaves, what, $290,000 or so that, and we're funding it with $400,000 from the general fund. My numbers making sense here? See what I mean?
In 2022, it would not be 400. Most of this is gonna be paid for in 21, by my estimation, because of the timing of the financial software and the radio booster.
Okay. All right. I mean, I don't have a problem with it per se. I'm just trying to, balance where things are coming from. And when I see a contribution from the general fund towards this, and I see that is broken out from different categories, office, et cetera, which plays against the asset depreciation, I guess, and the replacements. It looks like we're gonna have we're well covered, at least with the contribution we're making from the general fund for what this budget revenue says. In other words, if we put the actual 403,000 into this revenue category, our revenue would be over $1 million in the capital reserve fund for 22.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
Now, that doesn't translate to us looking at the contribution from the general fund to the capital reserve fund as a potential area to cut to balance the general fund budget, is it? Or is that a possibility then that we would look to that and maybe not make remember we did that last year, right? There was what was termed a surplus.
We agreed to reduce it by $100,000
That's
in
right, it was
2021 and
two.
2022.
Okay, yeah.
To reduce the contract.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not falling apart over this, I'm just trying to reconcile the numbers.
No, I get it, Mike. And to your point, I think the misrepresentation is looking back at the general fund prior to this being done and seeing how much really we're gonna need for the capital reserve.
Okay.
So in effect, we are gonna gain that X amount of dollar difference, 100,000 or so, from the general fund, the 600,000 we're
So
missing.
John, there's one area within the expense category in the general fund where we may be able to, start to, one trimmer from that current deficit projected.
There's another one there.
Oh, yeah.
There may be some meat in that. The note on the right side, 431,000.
Yeah.
There may be some meat in there too. Under transportation.
So, I'm looking at the expenses on the capital reserve fund side. We're gonna be replacing one large dump truck, pickup truck, trailers, Gator ATV, mowers, jetter vacuum, plasma cutter, and tractor mower. And that adds up to 413,000.
With
Oh,
31.
excuse me, 431. And so that's all part of capital schedule. Dollars are there for that, et cetera.
There may be some meat in there, Mike.
Okay. Meat or fat?
I would never call it fat, but there may be money in there that we can cut back on, depending on the shape of the different pieces of equipment.
Okay. And that's where some of these questions come in
With the Director of Public Works on some of these items to say, do we need to replace it this year? Can we press it another year? I don't like deferred capital spending. I mean, that's why we have the capital reserve schedule. But to hear from Mark that, the reason we need these 5, 6, 7 different pieces of equipment, irrespective of whether they're in the schedule or not, I'd like to know the status of them, that why we're replacing them this year, besides the schedule itself. But yeah, this one's falling apart. Can't get parts for it, can't get chips. It only has 3 tires, wheels, all that stuff. I think it'd be worthwhile to get at least a little assessment from it.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I'm afraid that we're going to hear something we don't wanna hear, and that's, I've gotta replace these because I've got equipment that doesn't have, that I'm waiting on microchips for.
Well, the other thing is,
That's-
it's kicking the can down.
It is.
Because it'll be in the 2023.
Well, that's right, and you don't wanna do that. But I'm not sure he's gonna do that. I think that the trucks are almost apart from this. I mean, I think the one big truck is just a scheduled replacement.
Right.
Yes, that's correct, Mike. This one was good.
But it'd be good to hear from him on those specific pieces of equipment and what the
I would be disappointed if he wasn't asking for everything he wanted in the first pass. And I would be surprised if there wasn't something in there that he doesn't need.
Well, Mark, he'll say, look, I'll do whatever, Mark will say, I'll
I'll
do
do
whatever
whatever
you
you
want,
Yeah.
but we don't want to, discount him that way either.
Well, I can tell you, I do know that the large there is a large dump truck right now that's sitting there idle because there are 4 of them sitting in there.
Oh, yeah.
But the Gator, they've been having miserable trouble with
All right,
for
there
a
you
while.
go.
I know that they've
Okay.
been having that thing into mechanic every other.
What you're suggesting then is that some are worse than others.
Yeah,
Well, that's what we wanna know. isn't it?
yeah, the Gator is definitely in bad shape.
Maybe some have to be replaced right away, and
Right.
others may be in good shape.
Right.
But the intent isn't as David said, the intent is not to kick it down the road, but just would like to hear on the status of those pieces of equipment.
Absolutely.
What else we got? 398 estimated range for our Hershey's Mill Dam project. And of course, that 398 is playing against the 380, was it 380 of the grant?
Yeah.
So it's a little, the estimate at the moment is over that grant amount, but it's not a significant overage.
Is it
That's
actually
still-
going to be a significant
Well,
overage?
We really need to look at it in tandem with this year because the way that the grants are scheduled, we can't get the payout until it's basically all complete.
Yeah.
So I've got 263,000 in 21 and I've got almost 400,000. That comes up to, a little more than your 630. So,
Okay.
I was on the phone with Gavin Fleming today, and the original schedule of the project had them substantial completion by next week.
Yeah.
That is not happening.
Well, that's why I asked you
So-
today whether you could get an update.
Yeah, but
so-
one of the problems is the washout that they had. I went over with Mark to look at it.
And
It turns,
There's,
it turns out they use small stone
instead
of the larger rock, which is cheaper.
But
But the small stone washes away very easily. The larger rock wouldn't have, and that's what they
So
should have
you follow
used.
the spec, interesting.
no, the spec was the small, so so we actually had decided to try to increase the stone a little bit, in order to keep it on the stream
It's more
bed.
stable, yeah.
So their stream engineer, which that's a thing, I just found that out. Their stream engineer approved that and that should be going in there. One of the issues I have with that project is there's 2 guys on that project at all times. And we can't tell the contractor how to do the job, but when it starts affecting the timeline, and I think we've all had, Mark Miller and I have had issues with this for a while, so we'll keep an eye on it, but right now it's running behind, that's all I can tell you.
But no date,
No.
estimate at this point?
No, I would say early 2022 is the best I can do.
Or early
What's the
2020.
budget impact 21 and 22 if it doesn't get completed and turned over?
I'm just gonna ask that.
It costs more for one thing.
Everything rolls into 22 and.
Which shouldn't cost more.
Well, this is the back and forth we have to have from an engineering perspective, because we have to have people out there inspecting it. We just do. So
So
from a
the
Gannett
inspections are what-
from a Gannett Fleming perspective, now, I don't want to get too much into this here, but I had my own ideas on how I can work that out. But, yeah, it's gonna go over budget. For sure. But-
One of the things we wanna do when we do these contracts is to put in a clause that says time is of the essence.
Oh, we have that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
we have
And
that.
there was a drop.
It should
dead
cost, it should cost them if they go past that date.
date. Well, and of course, when you do that in a contract, you have to put it
performance as well. I mean, you can't just they're not gonna accept just a pure negative one if they can't do it. If they do it sooner, get it done sooner, then they get, a cost, bonus.
Saves us money.
And it's always preferable to try to work things out with the contractor, but at the end of the day, I'm comfortable with the way the contract's been written in our favor, so.
Is there gonna be a chance that this is, because of all these delays, is this gonna affect the grant status? Are we gonna have to worry about that?
No, Susan, we've already been proactive. I asked Mark Miller for an update of what his expectation was to, this year or next year, and looking at the grant dates that Susan had, I had her reapply so that we're covered through 22.
Yeah, we did that like a month ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get on.
One more note, I did just get an update from Gannett Fleming on Milltown. So when we redo this, I have a much better schedule, idea for engineering construction for 21, 22, and 23.
Schedule cost,
Schedule and cost.
up or down?
Cost is flat, except I don't think any of the projections before had an additional 440,000 of engineering built into the projections. They only had the 2.4 millions, so.
Oh. Wow.
That'll be in the projects, capital that I will put together, all these projects, timelines, sources of funds, et cetera.
I saw your notes, I responded. Well, the one way to look at it, and especially for somebody like yourself and maybe John, is that, once these two projects are done, these two park-like projects, stormwater related to MS4, the benefits they'll have. I don't see a lot of big infrastructure, new park improvement projects coming, unless we,
You know, I'm Irish in me.
yes.
It's making me nervous now. What you're saying is the state isn't gonna pass any more laws, are tightening
We
things
only
up.
have two dams, we don't have to worry about that.
From your lips to God's ears.
I will say it's a bonus that accounts for the pollutant reduction plan under MS4. But to your point, we shouldn't have any big ones like that unless MS4 changes for the worse.
Well, that's right, and they changed the target, and then also we have to do retrofitting of some of our basins or something like that. That would be, that's exactly right. Yeah, well, that's when we would go to Harrisburg.
Let's goes to Harrisburg.
Ready to move on to transportation.
Yeah, let's do
I'm taking Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, this is related to 2021, is the Loop Road widening scheduled?
It's restriping. We have been informed by West Goshen that it's about 2 weeks away.
Oh, okay. All right.
Before it
I'm gonna
snows.
bank on that, that's good.
Before it snows.
2 weeks, 2 years, something like that.
I really don't care about the restriping. The only thing I care about with that project is that they smoothed out the bump
Yes.
on the westbound lane, Boot Road at the Green Hill Road intersection.
Yeah. It's a
Well,
mess.
even if you're sitting
It's a
in the
mess.
other lane, the Green Hill Road lane, and the UPS trucks are having everything else goes,
I'll get there.
well, we're gonna get Mark out there to jackhammer and smooth it out. It's time that disappears. I think I can hear it from my house.
Any questions on?
The transportation fund?
It's pretty
I
straightforward.
don't really have anything on that one. I mean, the main one we have is the,
Loop Road? We have
Just to clarify though, I have been told 2 weeks before.
okay. Oh, all right. Yeah.
Now for the fun one. Sewer operating.
Sewer operating fund. This page is revenue only. This is not assuming a sewer rate increase at this point. It's basically taking the rate increase that we had as of Q3 of this year and extrapolating that out for a full year.
that's reflected in the increase in the sewer fees. That 90,000, David, that extrapolating the current increase.
Which 90,000 are you?
The dollar increase in the far right hand.
Yeah. It's
Under revenue sewer fees.
99.
Yeah, it's basically, that's looking versus the 21 projection. So if you compare what we have in, we actually had in the budget, you're almost flat. But if I take the total dollars that we would typically get from the number of people on the sewer at the current rate that we have,
Mhm.
we should be covered with the existing sewer rate.
Okay, gotcha. So, let me just see,
Well, when you say we're covered, let's be clear. We're taking the estimated ending fund balance down, right?
that's what I was looking at, the the fund
Page-
balance, where's the fund balance estimate for the end of the 22? Where's that? I missed that.
It's on page 8.
Page
Yeah,
eight,
it was on page 8, right.
so we're taking it down from,
21 is 968 and 22 is 968.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
kind of a
Okay.
wash.
well, how come there's such a difference in the 2021
Yeah,
actual versus projection?
what's going on
What page are you looking at?
Eight.
On 8,
Yeah,
okay.
the 1.553,
there? 2021
one year-to-date actual
and 2021 year.
and projection.
It's the expense side.
Page
Page eight is,
expenses.
Yeah, expenses.
It's basically because of the loans. It's a big part of it.
Oh, their principal payments due towards the,
Oh,
probably
okay.
November.
Okay.
And we also didn't do a transfer, which would be done at the end of the year.
Okay,
so, the budget is down then from prior years.
The expenses are up, but the revenue is also up.
overall, which is up more.
I checked, it matches page to page. Revenues and expenses are the same number.
Now, the one question, that I know it's been coming up with the Municipal Authority is infrastructure, is capital. And I think with where we are at the moment with the Westtown Pump Station, and then, matter of fact, they're supposed to, I guess the bids are gonna be soon. We're gonna get the bids for the pump station,
Is that gonna be there?
any day,
I was told a week,
a week,
2 weeks.
not 2 weeks.
But you've been told that.
I've been told that.
No, that one I know. So,
No, that one I'm pretty confident is gonna
Yeah.
come in very soon.
yeah, okay, so, we kind of know what the number is gonna be there. We have a pretty good feel for the Hershey's Mill Estates repairs, and we've got, stimulus money for it. But I'm pretty certain that come 23, the 23 budget, the municipal authority is gonna wanna look to, possibly a capital, reserve increase, increased funding. And if nothing else, for these kind of contingencies that we haven't been planning for. And then we talked about the general fund, some of the things we don't schedule, like roads and stormwater. Well, for the sewer fund, sewer operation, we don't schedule capital replacement for sewer mains or the lines. It's only really the pump stations in the plant. So that's one of those contingency infrastructure that what's facing us with Hershey's Mill Estates, the lines fail. And that's why we all of a sudden have a $600,000 to $900,000 bill staring at us. That would have been a disaster, not a disaster, but it would have been a definite rate increase if we didn't get that stimulus money to offset that this year and next year. So I think it's gonna come up next year with the municipal authority, say, we wanna start to build in further capital asset planning for some of these to prepare for the potential for other Hershey's Mill Estates failures.
Well, you're talking about what David was talking about.
I think
You ought to explain that.
Well, that's a different
People
fund
know.
though, but that's a different fund. This is the sewer fund, which is enterprise and segregated, whereas the general fund and the capital fund, that's a different one. So, but
We
but the
understand.
same, it's the same kind of conversation.
It's this,
So my question is, we're getting two tranches of the relief money, half of it this year and half of it next year.
Yes.
What about the timing of those two projects, the way station, pump station, and the Hershey's Mill Estates?
Well,
Are we gonna match the cost and?
yeah, currently the 914 project for this year is for the whole West Town Way, which we think will be all expended in this year. So that's the plan. Now, if you look at this is, I don't want to go back and forth too much, but the ARPA fund money in the very last page, we do have that as Hershey Mill Sewer Project for the whole kit and caboodle for that next year. Now, that can change based on info from the board, but right now, as a placeholder, the $949,917 for next year is right now, we just put it as Hershey Mill Sewer Project. The 914 this year, we don't have allocated for Hershey Mill. That's all West Town Pump Station.
So none of the Hershey's Mill stuff's gonna start this year, that's what I'm thinking.
Oh, no, yeah.
Timing between expenses.
No, Mark was projecting sometime in the winter after the new year.
Yes, yeah, that's my understanding from the,
As far as that money, the federal relief money that's gonna come next year, will we be able to discuss next year when that comes, if there's gonna be anything else we can allocate some of that money toward?
Well, I would like that discussion to happen like now.
That's what I
So this
thought.
should be- I mean, tonight, but then also, if you individually want to give me ideas,
Right.
you email Dave and I, but we should budget and allocate that accordingly
Right.
during the fall. That would be my
That's
preference.
kind of what I was thinking, so, and specifically, I was thinking, we have, Park and Rec is getting more active. And we also have the new AV room we're gonna be getting hopefully soon. But if we were to need an audiovisual, an abbreviated version of the PA system, an audiovisual video, that kind of thing, that could be taken out into the park system or
So maybe like a mobile version.
like a mobile version. So I don't know if that's something that we can put into the budget, if that's something that we can talk about. But I'm thinking that if we had a mobile version, it could be a little bit more flexible in that if we didn't have to, maybe if we went to a different location for a meeting, or if we had an event, whatever that event might be, community day, that kind of thing, and use that system within the park, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what I was wondering about.
well, relative to the stimulus dollars, I'm not sure that would fall under broadband, which is one of the categories.
I mean,
I
it's.
don't know.
Yeah, it's an AV upgrade like this is. I can see if Kristen would categorize it as what we're doing, because she did say what we're doing here is fine, it's a broadband infrastructure upgrade. Whether a mobile one would fall under the same category, I could ask solicitor's opinion on that, for sure. But yeah, I mean, we could always do a budget amendment next year, a resolution and allocate, but it is better if we have an open budget right now to try and do it. But yeah, feedback on that would be, preferable.
Yeah, I was just thinking because Jason is so busy with park and rec activities, and sometimes it's hard to corral people. And if you have a really great AV system, at least.
Yeah, just a thought on that. I know whatever the board wants to do, but if it was okay and it was legal, I think some kind of mobile setup would be far less expensive than, what we're doing here for the upgrade to the room, most likely.
What you could do is just take that same number, carve out a piece and just call it, broadband upgrade and just plug it in the budget that way and.
Sure.
and-
And then the Hershey Mill project would be covered, the rest of it by, I've already got 50,000 in here from the 950 going up to $1 million. So the 950 came from ARPA and the other 50,000 came from sewer op. So we would just add whatever that difference is coming from sewer op or sewer
Yeah,
cap.
okay, that's good. Good point.
So if anybody else has any other ideas for that money, you want those ideas now?
Well, I mean, I'll take them now, but I've just meant over the fall for
Yeah.
sure, So November 16th is that, preliminary budget, and that's when we like to have it all nice and neat and ready to go. So anytime before then would be, preferable.
I would say I don't have any at this point based on what I know about the parameters for being able to expend.
Yeah.
Those kind of stuff. So I don't
I
know.
don't either. Okay.
So,
So to clarify, the payments and the interest for the loans has been verified for 22. And also these transfer numbers to Municipal Authority and to Sewer Capital Reserve. So the information on that would be the 220,329 going to Municipal Authority
yeah.
includes
22% increase.
130,000 for relining and a little over 90,000 in to make MA's expenditures covered.
Okay. And then transfer to sewer capital reserve. We have a good increase there. Can you explain that one, Dave, is the transfer to sewer
Capital reserve may have to do with lag time, something, I'm not sure, but
It's
92% increase.
sure that's
That's
well,
page 8, right at the bottom.
it's got 160,000 for our annual transfer that we put from sewer up to sewer cap. Then there's 125,000 for the Ridley Creek new UV system.
Oh, okay, that's
That was
not
the
a
one
grant.
when the light pole came down,
Oh,
fried the board. We were talking about that at the MA
Yes.
meeting.
yes.
I saw that.
Yep.
I remember looking for that.
125,000, and then there's a little over 23,000, or around 23,000 for a new Ridley Creek meter and a new Ridley Creek manhole.
No, I got it. I forgot about that. That was, I guess, Mike Ellis kind of informed us of that last month meeting.
It's a little more than we had expected
Yeah,
at first
yeah,
glance.
when it was first brought up, it was okay, well, and then he started to mention the numbers, and it could have been more than that too.
Yeah.
So I forget how he explained it, but now I forgot about that. All right. I don't have anything else on the sewer. It's kind of taken care of itself.
Sewer capital is getting its 160,000 in the projection, and 22, there's the same 308,000 that's coming in from sewer op.
Yeah.
Then the 221,297 going out of sewer cap to the Municipal Authority is paying for Ridley Creek spare pump, the 50,000 that I indicated for Hershey Mill, the estate sewer replacement that wouldn't be covered by the ARPA.
Right.
That's $1 million project in total. This would also include going from sewer cap to MA, the 125, and then also the meter and manhole. It goes in from sewer op to the reserve and reserve to the MA.
Yep. And the estimated ending fund balance, that's not in, for instance, at the end of the 2022 budget, 2,339,000. That's not including any of the stimulus funds in it. That's just what the.
Correct.
Okay. And
It really is only increasing because of the extra funds being moved for the new.
okay, so essentially from 21 to the end of 22 at the moment projected, the capital reserve, or the sewer capital reserve fund balance it's actually increasing. But what I'm missing in my understanding is, I know we have the stimulus dollars. But when, when we start the payouts for the Westtown pump station, they're not, that doesn't look like it's impacting this fund balance.
No, that's gonna be the bond as well as the ARPA money.
Okay, well, okay, very good, very good.
A lot of moving pieces.
All right, yeah, of course, I mean, that's, you know.
No, good question, yeah.
Fund, multiple funds.
Next is Municipal Authority. I kind of tried to group these all together, sewer op, sewer
Yeah.
reserve, MA. They all go hand in hand, and you should be able to follow the money from one to the other. So these are the same big projects, money coming in from sewer op and from cap reserve. And then the municipal authority ultimately funding all of these projects.
Yeah, and these are, for instance, expenses that the municipal authority will approve every month when they have their invoices, et cetera. That's this budget.
Yeah, but Mike, I would like to point out, because this goes back to something you brought out earlier with the collection system being a little bit more proactive. There is $130,000 included for continue the pipe relining, so slit lining, aging infrastructure, so to speak. So that's, what I would classify as a proactive approach for
Yes.
collection systems.
You know, I'm glad you said that, Eric.
It's fine.
Yeah,
By the way, it's DEREK.
That's correct.
no,
Yeah, it's not
wrong.
DERICK.
That's wrong.
Rick?
I probably wouldn't have said anything for the next 25 years.
Well, it took me a while with Michelle, with
It's all
one
good,
L.
it's all good.
What's the?
About 40 emails, and I probably.
RC is Ridley Creek, and STP is sanitary treatment.
Okay.
Thanks, Mom.
So I didn't know what they were either before.
All right, that's, I'm glad you pointed that out.
Any other specifics on municipal authority?
No, that is, that's what we call an important minor budget. Refuse fund.
That brings us to refuse fund. We are all aware of the new contract with AJ Blasinski. They were the low bidder. That contracted price, you'll see down in expenses, it is $912,598. That is because none of the roadside littering is included in the refuse fund amount. The roadside littering is monthly as needed out of the general fund.
We want to make sure that we have some way of monitoring that and making sure it's getting done too. When does that take place? Can you make sure that we find out what their schedule is?
Yeah, I actually don't know the specifics of it
And the
right now, but
streets.
I can take a look.
That was something I know that Mike, you had said, you wanted to have some accountability there, me too.
I think there should be, probably one, I'm gonna guess a public works, employee, whether it's Mark or Kevin or whomever,
Yeah.
Vinny, one of the other guys that, kind of shepherds that and is monitoring, when they're here, what roads they've done, and kind of keep an ongoing, monitoring list of what they've done so that we know what's going on. I'm not, how many bags of trash they collect during the day, et cetera. I mean, it may be of value, but just knowing what roads they're covering, what days they're in, and that maybe somebody goes out and, make sure that they are on the road and not just parked on the side having coffee and all that stuff. It's just oversight,
Yeah, and in the general fund, I have that being done quarterly. So if we did it less, it would be an additional, what was it, Chris, 4,000 each month.
Well, wait, I thought in the bid award, the amount was something like, was it 45,000 for the year, for the roadside litter collection? Was that
Pretty close. It is
Okay, like that.
4,000 a month.
4,000 a month?
But in the past, we've only done it twice, at most twice a year.
We're not obligated to spend that at 45.
That's
so it's
why
all
this-
on demand.
Yeah, that's why this Blazinski contract included here
All right.
does not include it.
Now and that's another element of monitoring. In other words, whether.
Around February, around June.
Yeah, and sometimes Public Works will know to say, let's get them and we need to do this. Other times, we might get a call from citizens or one of the other ABC's conservancy boards, and they oversee the Keep East Bradford or East Goshen Beautiful Day.
Right.
Well, it's good to have control over it too. It's not
Yeah.
one of those few things with trash, we
Yeah.
actually have control.
We don't want them to just start doing it every month and that's.
Okay.
So Dave, last week we had, turned down the toter program. The reason that I really wanted to turn it down, I didn't want to turn it down, but turn it down this time, was because that number of $19,000 for our grant match
Mhm.
was not in the budget. Is there any way that it can get into this budget? Or is it?
It can, but we've missed the deadline now.
Yes, I know, but for next year, so if there's another grant opportunity next year, if we have the 19 grand in place, then perhaps at that time, we can have another discussion,
It would probably be 23 that we would need to budget it for,
okay?
because of the timing of when you receive the grant money. It's
Yeah.
really delayed.
Oh, that's interesting, that's right,
There's a lag.
it was that
It would be
delayed,
July.
right?
If we did this year, it would be July of next year that we would actually probably get the money.
Okay, so that's something that maybe you can put in your notes for 2023?
Sure.
Okay.
And we were having more ongoing conversations with AJ Blasinski. I was actually on a call with them with Derek and Mark to just check on why their costs went up. It was what we thought. It was labor, it was fuel. Basically, they had a frozen contract with us because of how low COLA was for the past 5 years. We were flat and their costs kept going up. So now they're behind the ball,
They're catching up.
like every other trash company does that.
It's interesting, recycling fees are projected to go down by 8%, for some $4,000. So is that a good thing? I mean, it sounds like a good thing. We're not paying as much. I mean, things obviously flip-flopped 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago from a revenue source to an expense. But we've gone, now the budget for recycling is, for 22 is 40,000. It was 44,000 in 21, which is what we're projecting for the end of the year. So
We've gotten a lot of credits. We've gotten a lot of credits this year so far, Mike. So we've literally only paid 10,000. It doesn't look like we're going to hit that 45,000 that was budgeted. So conservatively, I put in what we did in 19 and 20.
Okay. And
I hope
so,
that continues.
and if that actual doesn't go, well, say the actual ends up at $20,000 instead of 44,000, for example, that's gonna, our ending fund balance will be higher, and it'll reflect also at the end of our 2022 budget, because that fund balance the trend has been down.
Yes.
Over these last number of years, so we're gonna be down below 400 under the current,
Maybe that's where we can find some of our total money.
Like just a note, I got a text from Mark Miller, and he said they do monitor the roadside litter program quite profusely.
I thought they probably.
So somebody's watching us, just in case you guys were wondering.
I know there's at least one other person watching.
Mark,
Mark,
hey, Mark, thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, typically in talking through the grant,
Yes.
the representative, I think she's up in Norristown, going through the process with her, one of the things that would probably make us a good candidate is because we actually have a healthy balance in our refuse fund, and they would want to see basically the township eat it and reduce the fund a little bit for an $18,000-$20,000, and that would make us look better because we're investing in the future on our own dollar. Then they give us the money back almost, and then over a series of years, and we also didn't quantify what it could save us in tipping fees. Just didn't have enough time or data at the time to see if that would be another factor that could accelerate how quickly we could recoup that money on top of
I
just
think
the
it's a great
increased
idea,
recycling.
I think it's a great idea and a great program, but the problem is that it felt so rushed, and there's a lot more involved in getting involved in a program like that than just simply, well, let's do it, it sounds great. The other concern that I have though is, and when it's time, before we make that application, I wanna have been part of the discussion with AJ Blazinski regarding their workers' comp situation, because if we're gonna be getting large toters, I wanna make sure that they're not gonna be holding us accountable and raising our rates because of their higher workers' comp.
And he made it clear that he would be more than willing to come in and sit down and talk with everyone and get all of our concerns allayed.
Yeah,
That's perfect. Yeah, that sounds- yeah,
He was driving the truck when we called him.
Yeah, I just wanna make sure that we are, we're not creating another monster. I don't want to see anybody become injured, and I don't wanna have anybody out of work because we've switched to this program. So I wanna make sure it's something that we look into.
It's interesting, I followed a Blazinski truck down Forest Lane, and there was a single operator in the truck picking up the toters with the mechanical robotic arm and dumping them. So there's no two guys hanging off the back of the truck kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
And of course, they do that, they use it in West Goshen, right?
They don't even have anybody get out of the place, out of the truck. This is a complete side, automatic side. load.
Yeah, that's the one, because I was behind them many times and watching the
He said that there was pros and cons to both. I mean, obviously saving on the labor, but there's,
mechanical issues.
yeah, and the direction of double and switching trucks out, and there's a lot more to it than I had originally anticipated.
So what we have here is the budget based on a $75 to $95 per quarter. That's something we need to, we're gonna be considering that as a board, voting on that at budget, at the time of the final budget approval in December, or is that something we're going to be initiating sooner than the budget approval?
I would recommend doing it the night of the budget.
Okay.
That's my recommendation.
Do we want to, of course, anybody that's listening will hear that,
Effective,
I mentioned that we're going to be increasing, because of the contract cost, increasing the quarterly rate. But we're not going to have a newsletter or anything out between now and the time of the budget approval.
We can do a constant contact as an interim.
I mean, I'm not trying to stir everybody up about it. I mean, it's a legitimate increase, and it's not for somebody, it could make a difference for somebody and put them under some stress, but it's something I think that the sooner that residents know about it, they can assimilate it. So it's just a thought.
It's not bad. I mean, they're gonna call one way or the other.
They are. I'd rather get out ahead of it and let people know.
They're gonna call. Well, you're looking at the person they're gonna call, Chris.
And I'll put together an analysis sooner rather than later to show how that's gonna happen.
Yeah, you can put a little blip on the website or something.
I'm
like that.
definitely gonna call. But the point we should be making is that Blazinski has gone up to almost 25% on us. Gone up 5%.
I agree. And we should make a point to residents that that was the lowest bid by almost 100%.
And maybe that's why it went up.
I'll put it in the minutes for tonight's meeting too, so.
Okay, good.
People do.
All right.
Okay.
I don't have anything else on refuge myself. The bond fund.
No,
Ah, I
we're
was
trying to
waiting.
talk.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming.
You do not disappoint. You do not disappoint.
Okay. Lead us through the bond fund budget, Dave or Derek.
Let's see.
This is basically the projects we're gonna spend on.
Yeah, we were actually, for a lot of this, we're talking about some of these projects already. We have the West Goshen project that we have to do. And then the Milltown Dam, obviously with the engineering and construction is a big one. So those alone take up the majority of this,
Yeah, you're
this
right.
fund, so, we've already talked about.
Yeah, the West Goshen, that was assuming that, most of what we would owe is covered with our, ARPA money. And then the remainder, plus there's a small amount that, MAFA, had given us prior. That could change a little bit, because I think it may be a little bit higher than what he just recently said. Not significantly though.
And we have, I see we've got $35,000 in for segments A and B engineering. These are residual amounts that we're expecting that we're gonna have to be paying, even though we may not be, we're not gonna be looking at completing as, at least as it was programmed, section B, segment B. But 35,000, is that a place mark, or is that some known?
The 35 and the 15 were place markers, seeing how these bills, the timing of some of them are coming in late.
2-3 months behind.
But I actually just communicated with Mark Gordon this morning, and via some emails that he had back and forth with PennDOT on the grant money. And they're not paying for the overbid amount that they restructured to the whatever is expense number 2 in the bidding process that was approved. So the bid is over what PennDOT had allocated, and we're gonna be on the hook for that. And it looks like that's about $88,000,
For
which is
segment,
not in this calculation.
and what segment is that for?
That's gonna be, I believe that is for B, no, A.
For A, for that small segment, okay, all right.
Yeah, RoadCon, out there with all the trucks, it looks like that's gonna, in this 50,000 placeholder is gonna be 88,000. If it rolls into 22.
Okay. The monies will take care of it, for the most part.
Yeah, and the Milltown numbers will change, when I plug in the new
Yeah,
estimates that we've got. For Cheese Mill,
Would this be a good opportunity to talk about the infrastructure bond, or the infrastructure,
that contingency.
the contingency fund, yeah? Would this-
As
this
a new
is-
fund.
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
is this a time to talk about that, or do you wanna wait for a few minutes?
Well, let's, we're
Wanna
coming to
finish
the
this up?
operating reserve fund budget next anyway,
So-
the bond is done. So
Okay.
that timing would be good, Michelle, I think.
the bond fund basically, Michelle, was from the 2017 bond proceeds, and that was split between sewer and general fund projects. And it'll be in my projects when we do all the capital, how it was sourced, grant dollars, capital reserve dollars, bond money. And I'll get you a lot more clarity on that stuff, at that time. But pretty much everything for the trail should be frozen, hopefully moving forward, and everything has been earmarked, what should be spent, in the original receiving of those funds. So I finally have built that information.
Before we move to the next one, Michelle, and then that would cue you, when we talk about the operating reserve fund. I heard earlier tonight on the Milltown Dam was that looks like the construction costs are going to be
140,000.
and that's, those are soft engineering costs that we didn't include in the original budget, correct?
To validate that, I don't think they were.
Yeah.
But it's depending on whether the original budget was 2.4 or 2.9.
And the reason I ask about that is whether or not, if there is already, before we even put a shovel in the ground, let's just say $500,000 that may not have been budgeted or anticipated, so that's gonna be a cost. Whether or not we do a review again of what the improvements are gonna be at Milltown to see whether we're still vested in all the improvements that were intended for it. I don't know, I'm completely throwing that off out on the table to review what the site plan is and the improvements that were built into it. But
I'm not sure whether that confounds our grants or anything else that are associated.
And also a new estimate, because they recommended doing that again.
Yeah, I mean, we are pretty far into the process.
Yeah.
A process that actually started before I got on board,
Yeah.
with DEP, the Army Corps. The Army Corps has come back and kind of given us blessing. We actually just sent letters out to that area, regarding the floodplain, and that was a requirement by FEMA. We're waiting on a letter back from DEP in order to proceed with it, if you will. But to answer your question, I don't, to me, just preliminarily, without looking at it, I would say we're too deep in the weeds.
Yeah.
That's just my
And
initial
the-
assessment.
In the plans, the improvements look fine, it's just,
Yeah.
you know, when you hear all of a sudden, that's 500,000 or so that we didn't, also, might not be in the budget, might not be in our
Well,
funds.
Gives you shades of some of the West Goshen treatment plant stuff that you're seeing. When you have these projects, there's so many years, you don't build in enough contingency at the get-go, especially when you're borrowing the money.
And that,
That's up against it.
and Dave and I have had numerous conversations too about looking at these projects more in a multi-year setting.
Yeah.
So for instance, you know, Milltown can be a 3-year project.
Yes.
And trying to get percentages down for those specific years. It's not an easy task, but I think going forward, it'll make our lives a lot easier eventually when we budget that way.
To swallow it a little easier.
Yeah, well, just also planning and making sure we're not saying, all right, we're gonna budget 500 grand for this project. Okay, well, are you sure all that project's getting done next year? So that sort of, you know, analysis is.
And spend it, you know, no sense in putting something in the budget that's not gonna be spent.
Exactly. It's not easy, but it's necessary.
All right, yeah, well, if you can do that, that's great. All right, so,
Move on?
Yeah, well, I think this is where we were going to possibly talk a little bit about, David and Mike had talked about an infrastructure fund. I think it's a fantastic idea. I think we need to seriously consider, our infrastructure is really aging, and there are a lot of projects that are up and coming, that we don't even know about. And, like, we didn't know about the Hershey's Mill Estates sewer issue until earlier this year when it failed. So I guess my question is, what kind of things will we be putting into that budget, so that we can start spending some of a fund down a little bit, so that we're not kicking the can down the road. Last year we kicked down the road, a pond. We need to get these ponds taken care of. They're becoming a problem. They're dying, and we just can't do it anymore. We have to take care of them.
Michelle, that's a good point. I want to ask, because I didn't pay attention to it when we were talking about the capital reserve fund. Do we have anything in the do we put anything in the capital reserve fund for 22 for instance, Bowtree? I know one of our citizens asked about that, the status, and I thought we were going to bring that back into the fall. And in fact, Mark Miller said that he thought he was going to be able to do some things this year with limited fund
It was in the
availability.
general fund, wasn't
It's
it?
in the general
It was
fund, in
in
the
the general
parks, it's in
Oh,
the
it's in the
parks.
park.
And we've got 20,000 this year slated in the 21 budget, and we've got 220, I believe, in
Okay,
next
all
year's
right,
budget.
excellent. So there's the example. So that one's, all right, so that was a little distraction. All right. So to pick up on what Michelle was saying, and for folks that are listening, the East Goshen Township, we're fortunate we have, first of all, our general fund is our main operating fund. The capital reserve fund, and put sewer aside, but the capital reserve fund is really dependent on the general fund to exist. The general fund, that's our main sewer, that's where our revenues are all seated, other than for fees associated with the sewer, which is a completely separate enterprise fund. But the general fund captures all the revenues, and those that are distributed to the capital reserve fund allow the capital reserve fund to do what it does, and that is to plan for aging infrastructure and depreciation and replacement of major capital items. The capital reserve schedule through the capital reserve fund includes things like our buildings, our facilities, our parks, our fleet of equipment for the public works, and other elements. But we do not, and most municipalities do not capital reserve or schedule replacement funding for roads or stormwater infrastructure. We all know infrastructure is a major topic of discussion now throughout the world, but domestically here, nationally, as we know, it's in the current Washington scene with what they're talking about. And we thought that with what we've encountered this past year, again, a sewer-related project, but we had a failure that was unanticipated, and we've have to repair it for a very tiny sum of anywhere between $600,000 and $900,000. Well, on the general fund side and capital reserve related roads and stormwater, we have aging infrastructure there with storm drains, the transmission lines between storm drains, et cetera. And we also have changing weather, whether you want to call it global warming, climate change, changing weather patterns. We're seeing more storms, more intensity. And so the question is not only when we have these storm events where we have damage, but if we have significant damage, to be able to provide contingency funding to not only repair, but possibly at the time of repair to a piece of stormwater infrastructure, possibly upgrade it to anticipate these new patterns of weather. And the same with roads, which are connected, and they're also susceptible to storms and failures. So in that regard, trying to look at a long-term approach for infrastructure and not just ignoring it until a disaster happens and then everybody scratches their heads, how are we going to do this? We're going to have to borrow money, emergency funds, et cetera, or waiting for the federal government to help bail us out, that we might establish a new fund that we would call something like a infrastructure contingency fund that would allow for future funding to support it and sustain it, but to initiate it with funds that we already have available in what's called our operating reserve fund. This is a fund that we're very fortunate to be able to have in East Goshen Township in the event of a serious contingency in our general fund categories of services and operations. If we had a disaster of some type or a major loss in revenue, that this operating reserve fund could serve. So far as I understand it, in the years that we've had this, approximately $2.6 million in this fund, we've not had to call upon it. So what the suggestion is that in establishing a new fund for considering infrastructure contingency situations, roads, stormwater, those that we don't fund, that we possibly pull funds out of this operating reserve fund and establish this new capital reserve or infrastructure reserve fund for that purpose. So that's kind of where we are. And again, local government works on a multi-fund system. This would be another one that would have a target and a purpose behind it. And in the future, we'll have to consider funding it as well as the starter funds that might come from this operating reserve fund. And I would propose, if we were going to do this, that we maybe take half of the funds in the operating reserve fund, 2.6 that's in there, and split it and start the new infrastructure contingency fund with that seed money of, say, $1 million or $1.3 million, something like that. So that's kind of
It's a good idea. I think it's a good idea.
I do want to make a point here. What we're doing is creating a new fund, but we're not adding any more money to the money we have. We're taking money out of one pocket and putting it in another pocket.
It's a reallocation.
It's a
John. That's
reallocation,
right.
and I agree with it, as long as everybody understands it's a reallocation. There is no revenue stream that's gonna go into this fund unless it comes from the operating reserve or the operating budget. And again, all we're really doing is shifting money from the left-hand pocket to the right-hand pocket. So we have to be careful.
Yeah, John, and that's right, as a seed starter, but I think again, looking long-term and the picture of funding this and sustaining it, presuming, say, we had say in 2022, we had a serious failure of some stormwater infrastructure, road washes out or whatever, and we've got $300,000 or $400,000 to correct that. We pull it out of that fund. So we're starting to think longer term, how we're gonna maintain and sustain that fund for future events. And that's gonna be a policy question as to how we do that. It's gonna have to come out of the general fund revenue source somewhere, just the way we fund the capital reserve fund. It's a question of how we do that, when we do it, and whether we become programmatic annually with our budget, or whether we base it on a policy basis of if we get a surplus from our general fund at the end of the year, that we put X amount of dollars into that fund. So to maintain it. But initially, John, you're right. Right now, to start this fund, it will be a reallocation of existing monies, no additional spending or no additional funds. But for the future, I think that's a conversation that this board or the board's going to have.
I think part of the process is that we wanted to have staff identify infrastructure and failing in, doing an audit, I guess, of infrastructure. Right now, I mean, roadways and curbing is part of aging infrastructure. That's not in our capital reserve fund, right? It's in the operating budget. So do we move that infrastructure from an operating budget into the
In some way,
I'm sure of doing it.
Yeah.
But, it's, again, we're not creating any extra money.
Not
We're
yet,
just-
not yet, not at this time.
But if you the whole idea is to put a spotlight on aging infrastructure.
Yes.
We built out in 1970 and 80, and all our infrastructure is aging. And the idea is to identify that, recognize it, identify it, and then figure out what our, instead of roadways become an asset, they become a liability, right? Because we've got to replace them every 17 years. So, a lot of stuff we carry as an asset will be a long-term liability at some point. So it's a matter of putting a spotlight on it, recognizing it's there, and looking at a long-range plan to fund that somehow.
Are you suggesting doing that
In this budget right now,
when?
I'm not suggesting funding, this year, we're really talking about 2022, would be to establish the fund with a reallocation of dollars from the existing operating fund. And when we have our budget conversation for 23, have the conversation about this infrastructure contingency fund as to, are we going to fund it this year? Are we going to put something into it or not? I mean, but not for 22. There's no additional dollars in the budget for 22 to add anything more than this reallocation to get it started.
you want to reallocate for this budget?
Yes.
22 budget?
Yeah.
22.
So,
I just want to be clear what you're doing. Dave's got to do that.
Yeah, I mean, procedurally, I would just do a resolution. Again, it's gonna be a busy night, but we're gonna pass a lot of things. But in addition to the budget and what we have to pass for the trash, I would do a resolution establishing this fund and allocating 1.3 or whatever you decide $1 million from the capital reserve fund or whatever. So it would be a resolution.
But to answer Michelle's question, so roadways, we already budgeted.
You're talking about the paving program?
Yeah, paving program, we already do that, right?
Yep.
So what kinds of things aren't really, that are aging that we need to be aware of and kind of put a spotlight on? And I have parks and open space. I have ponds, And I have stormwater management.
I was gonna say any type of stormwater.
It's within your power to put paving in too, if you want.
Yeah, well, that's right, we could do that in the future.
Yeah.
You know, just move it over and
Yeah.
plug it in
We're,
there.
we're moving the money over,
Yeah.
we can move the jobs over.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's also a fund that is really a kind of the hard version of the operating reserve fund that we presently have. The operating reserve fund is there in the event of some sort of a calamity where we've all of a sudden lost some major revenue and we need to keep our operations going. And the hard side of it would be this infrastructure contingency fund where if we had a serious storm and all of a sudden we've got major damage, and maybe we get federal funding, maybe we don't, maybe we, and all of a sudden we've got major repairs to do, we've got this fund that we can kick it in. We're not hitting our capital reserve fund, but that's why I use the word contingency. It's not just long-term replacement of aging, but it's in the event of an extreme event that would cause us to have to, dig into our pocket for.
So I feel like there's two different things there too, because what David was describing in the paving program is a little bit more programmatic
Yes.
in nature than what you're describing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying I think we'd have to massage a little bit exactly. Do we want it to be more proactive or reactive or a mixture of both, and just kind of work through that. But
Well, I was, when I talked about parks and open space also, I was thinking about like all the tree removal, all the open space we have. We have a lot of open space. We have 2.5 times the number of the acreage of open space in most townships our size. And how many trees have we taken down in 2021 with the elm board?
yeah, I don't know.
200 trees, I think. I saw.
Mark was tallying it up. Maybe he'll text you,
Well-
but it was a lot.
And this wasn't even Ida related, but there was one of the bad storms we had in the summer, Mark. I mean, we had to replace a lot of sand for the park area
Yeah.
and mulch over there because of the wash away from the storm. That wasn't Ida.
And the point is that, open space and parks don't generate any revenue. They generate expense, right? So we need to account for that, and we have to we get grants to build a beautiful playground. We gotta maintain it.
But and David, to be maybe response to Derek, this fund is kind of proactive, reactive, because what we're doing is it was recognizing it, as David said about this aging infrastructure, we're going forward. So we are being proactive, but we could have a situation where we've got a failure that happens from a storm event, and we've got to, we'll be in a position because we've been proactive to react effectively because we've got the funds available.
As long as we budget accordingly, it works both ways and it works together. So yeah.
But I think that establishing some parameters about when it's going to be used, et cetera. I've not ever been really clear on the operating reserve fund, when it would be used or not. Maybe I just haven't seen that resolution or don't recall it. But to have this, a pretty good understanding as we, embark on this new fund that, when it's going to be triggered, when we're going to use it or not. Of course, the board has discretion on something like that at almost any time if they feel that it's necessary, but to have parameters, especially from board to board, will enable continuity with effective policy from board to board if we know what the fund is really intended to be used for and when.
So I would.
That's all I'm gonna say on it, John.
What I would suggest is that there's a consensus, we can just go forward in the budget, and know that will be part of the resolution that we would pass December 21st in conjunction with the budget, and then we can establish the actual fund shortly after that.
You guys can suggest an amount. I suggest splitting the fund here between the two, but it's up to you guys.
That's something that I think we do need to kind of work out, massage a little bit, and really make sure that the parameters are specific. I think it's a novel idea. I don't think that there are townships who have
Very few that have been able
been
to.
this forward thinking, and I think it's fantastic. Public Works has done 100 to 130 trees, and the Knights contractors taking down 100 trees this year so far.
Not to belabor this too much, but one of the things, going back to the reactive versus proactive, another thing we can do is establish this thing and then look at how we sort of spend money over the next year and really, so I guess make it be a reactive thing initially, but then look at what sort of proactive programmatic things we can actually add over the next year and then do that for the 2023. It might be a good 1-2 step approach.
So what other townships and cities have done is they've gone out and identified quantified the future, 5 and 10 year plan for infrastructure and what would be included in the fund. And then they set a goal to fund that over a period of time. Plano, Texas is an example. They're like, I think 70 or 80% funded at their goal that they set a number of years ago. And there's the advantage of a new city being built, like there's a suburb of Houston right now. Well, they're growing at 10,000 people in the next 10 years, and they've established it at the beginning. And so we don't have the advantage of establishing it from the beginning. We're looking at it kind of retroactively now, but I think it's a great move that we're.
As you say, I think the key is it puts a spotlight on future thinking that's going to be valued. So that's great. And I know Dave and Derek, I know you got a lot on your plate. So
But I think what David just said kind of strengthens my argument that we establish it and then we look at that over the next year as far as how we want to go forward over the next 5-10 years. So yeah.
All right.
Good. That's good.
The last page is that's the fire and rescue plan.
And I have Michelle's feedback on that, so I can add that to the mix. And then again, the majority would still be Hershey's Mill. That would be a small amount.
And it's only if everybody's agreeable to that, it's something, it's just for discussion.
I think it's a good idea. Anything else?
John?
Good of the.
Any questions? Any long questions that you might have?
You have a motion?
No, I think it's not a public discussion. We need public discussion, David.
Public discussion.
Yes, let's open it up to.
Christina, you're here.
Christina, you're the public.
Go ahead.
Christina Morley, 1530 Allison Drive. So I was making notes as you were talking about the infrastructure contingency plan. And what kept coming to mind was that a lot of the things that you were listing, the roads and the stormwater and floods and extreme storms and everything like that, again, it kind of all ties back to the hazard mitigation plans from the county. A lot of these things are covered when you look at that plan. And so I kept thinking, instead of just narrowly focusing on aging infrastructure and things that are getting old, maybe you could also name the fund something like a hazard planning fund. And so then dollars would also be available. So if you were thinking about a big storm comes, it's not just, it would be able to take care of those paving issues when part of the road washes away. That would also fall under stormwater management improvements that you would want to do, because that would be falling under hazard mitigation. You could do flood improvements to any of these ponds that need more drainage or any type of changes to them. Bridges, of course, we don't have a lot of bridges, but that little one down at the dip of Strasburg is a problem every time a storm happens. But then I think if we just go back and we look at the county's hazard mitigation plan and the worksheets that the township evidently submitted, listing what our assets are and what our hazards are identified as. I'm very curious to see what our what our submissions were, then maybe we can just use that as a starting point. And so then the fund is a little bit wider in nature and not just narrowly focused on things that are getting old, but things that may be susceptible to these impacts that we're now seeing. So that's just my comment.
That's good, that's a good comment.
Yeah, my original title, I stole from some town in Texas, which was the infrastructure sustainability fund. And so sustainability takes into consideration
I like that.
past and future ability to sustain in the face of a hazard or aging infrastructure, kind of encompasses everything, so.
And if we have a policy statement around it or an intent, that kind of suggestion that Christina has can be built into that it covers that and does broaden it.
Could be built in the resolution.
Yeah, that's good, yeah, appreciate that.
Any other public comment? John, I think you have a motion. that you-
I think I moved to adjourn.
Oh, second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Hi,
Any questions? Any further discussion?
Thank you.
Mike, we'd like to know your philosophy on everything that's gone back there.
Oh, no, wait. I'm gonna leave first.
No.